What if the world we know today, connected by roads, ships, and flight paths, began with nothing more than courage and curiosity? Long before maps could guide them or technology could ease their way, ancient travelers set out into the unknown, driven by something deeper than necessity. They crossed blistering deserts where the sun scorched the earth, scaled mountains that touched the sky, and sailed oceans that seemed to stretch forever. These were not just journeys of survival, they were quests to bridge worlds, to trade ideas, and to discover what lay beyond the horizon. And in doing so, they reshaped history itself. Think of the Silk Road, a winding thread of pathways linking the East and West, where spices, silk, and stories flowed like rivers. Or the Polynesian voyagers who navigated the vast Pacific by reading the stars, the winds, and the waves, venturing into open water with nothing but their wisdom to guide them. These travelers didn't just move goods, they carried knowledge, cultures, and innovations that would ignite the progress of civilizations. But what pushed them to take such risks? Was it ambition, desperation, or something more profound, an unshakable belief that the world was meant to be explored? Today, we're retracing their footsteps, uncovering the secrets of these ancient adventurers who dared to go beyond borders. We'll piece together fragments of their journeys, carvings on temple walls, artifacts buried for centuries, and tales passed down through generations. You'll discover how their choices, their struggles, and even their failures still echo in our modern world. From trade routes that shaped economies to the blending of cultures that defined entire eras, their legacies are alive in ways we might not even realize. So come along, this isn't just a story about the past. It's about the human spirit, the relentless drive to explore, and the connections that bind us across time. By the end, you might just see your own world a little differently. Among these early pioneers, the Phoenicians stand out as some of history's most daring seafarers. Picture a time when the Mediterranean was an untamed expanse, its waters hiding both promise and peril. With no compasses or maps as we know them, these merchants from the coast of modern-day Lebanon built sturdy ships and set sail, braving storms and unknown shores. Their journeys weren't just about survival, they were master traders, dealing in purple dye made from rare sea snails, glass, and cedar wood. But what truly set them apart was their network of ports, stretching from North Africa to Spain, creating the first web of international trade. Imagine the ripple effect. Goods, languages, and even alphabets spread with every voyage, shaping civilizations far beyond their homeland. Then there were the Greeks, whose wanderlust took them even further. While some set out for trade, others were driven by myth and legend, like Jason and the Argonauts, whose quest for the Golden Fleece blurred the line between story and history. But real-life explorers like Pytheas of Massalia went beyond myth. In the 4th century before the Common Era, he sailed past the known world, reaching what might have been Britain or even the Arctic Circle. His accounts of midnight suns and frozen seas sounded like fantasy to his peers, yet they hinted at a world far larger than anyone had dared to imagine. And let's not forget the Chinese explorers whose ambitions stretched overland. Zhang Qian, sent by Emperor Wu of Han, didn't just travel, he transformed history. Captured by nomadic tribes for years, he eventually escaped and pressed onward, reaching Central Asia. His reports of fertile lands and unfamiliar cultures ignited China's interest in the West, paving the way for the Silk Road. It wasn't just silk that traveled those routes. Ideas, religions, and technologies flowed both ways, proving that curiosity could bridge even the widest divides. What unites these travelers, separated by continents and centuries? is their refusal to accept limits. They didn't have satellite imagery or GPS, just an unshakable will to see what lay beyond the next mountain or horizon. And in doing so, they didn't just explore, they connected humanity in ways that still shape us today. Whether driven by profit, diplomacy, or pure wonder, their legacy isn't just in the routes they carved, but in the bold truth they revealed: the world is meant to be discovered. The Silk Road wasn't just a path, it was a living, breathing network of humanity's boldest ambitions. Picture this: a caravan of camels, laden with bolts of shimmering silk and sacks of pungent spices, trudging through the shifting sands of the Taklamakan Desert, where the very name meant you go in, but you won't come out. Yet they went anyway. These travelers braved not just the elements but bandits who lurked in mountain passes, and the sheer isolation of weeks without sight of another soul. What kept them moving? It wasn't just profit. It was the allure of the unknown, the chance to bring back something no one else had seen, whether it was Persian silverwork, Indian dyes, or Greek glassware that caught the light like captured rainbows. But the real magic of the Silk Road lay in what couldn't be weighed or measured. Buddhist monks carried sutras from India to China, transforming spirituality across continents. Papermaking, a closely guarded Chinese secret, slipped westward, revolutionizing how knowledge was shared. Even diseases traveled these routes, unwittingly reshaping populations. The Silk Road was the internet of its time, a chaotic, vibrant exchange where every encounter could change history. Take the story of the Chinese general Ban Kao, who pushed Roman legions to retreat with a single display of crossbow technology, proving that innovation could be as powerful as any army. Yet this network wasn't just about grand historical moments. It thrived on the small, human connections, the languages that blended into new dialects, the fusion of cuisines in bustling caravanserais where a Persian trader might teach a Tang dynasty merchant the secrets of rosewater pudding. These way stations, strung like beads along the route, became melting pots where a traveler from Samarkand could share astronomy charts with a scholar from Cheng under a sky neither had seen before. The Silk Road's legacy isn't confined to museums. It's in the way we still crave connection, how a single idea can cross oceans in seconds today, just as it once inched across deserts on camelback. Those ancient travelers didn't just move goods, they wove the first threads of globalization, proving that curiosity and courage could stitch the world together, one perilous step at a time. While the Silk Road connected continents by land, the Polynesians mastered an even greater challenge: the Pacific Ocean, an expanse so vast it could swallow entire civilizations without a trace. Picture this: a double-hulled canoe, no wider than a modern bus, bobbing on waves that stretched to the horizon in every direction. No compass, no maps. Just the rhythmic creak of wood, the whisper of the wind, and a navigator who knew the language of the sea. These voyagers didn't just stumble upon islands, they found them with purpose, guided by stars that scribbled paths across the night sky, by swells that hinted at distant land, and by birds whose flight patterns were living compasses. Take the story of Hawaii, a chain of islands so remote it's like finding a needle in an ocean. Polynesians reached it over 1,600 years ago, launching from the Marquesas or Tahiti, a journey of 2,500 miles, equivalent to sailing from London to New York without a single landmark. How they memorized the heavens, the star Rigel piercing the belt of Orion might mark one bearing while the Southern Cross pointed to another, but it wasn't just astronomy. They read the ocean itself. A sudden shift in wave patterns could signal an unseen island over the horizon. Clouds gathering in a particular way often hovered over land. Even the color of the water changed, reflecting the seabed below, hinting at shallow lagoons long before shores came into view. modern skeptics dismissed these methods as legend until the 1970s, when a crew aboard the Hocula, a replica of an ancient Polynesian canoe, proved them wrong. Using only traditional wayfinding, they sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti and back, a round trip of nearly 5,000 miles without instruments. The navigator Maupiailuk grew up on a tiny Micronesian island where these techniques were still alive. His success wasn't just a triumph of skill, it was a revelation. Ancient Polynesians didn't drift, they calculated, adapting to currents like the Great Pacific Conveyor Belt, which could carry a canoe sideways if not corrected. They even timed voyages to seasonal winds, turning nature's rhythms into a navigational tool. But perhaps their greatest legacy lies in the courage to set sail at all. In Europe, sailors clung to coastlines for centuries, fearing the open ocean's myths of monsters and edges. Polynesians embraced it. Their oral traditions tell of explorers like Cuyp, who chased a giant octopus across the sea to discover New Zealand, or Maika, whose longing for adventure led him to settle Koi. These weren't just journeys, they were acts of faith in knowledge, in the environment, and in the unshakable belief that the horizon wasn't a boundary, but an invitation. Today, their legacy ripples through science, inspiring studies in ecology and astronomy, and through culture, as Pacific communities revive these ancient arts. The Polynesians didn't just navigate the Pacific, they wove it into a tapestry of connections, proving that even the widest ocean could be bridged by human ingenuity. And in doing so, they left us a question: how much of the world's mystery could we unravel if we learned to listen as they did? Not just with tools, but with all our senses, and with the courage to follow where they lead. Alexander the Great didn't just cross borders, he erased them. At just 20 years old, he inherited a kingdom and turned it into an empire that stretched from the rugged cliffs of Greece to the lush valleys of India, a distance so vast it would take months to traverse even today. His army marched through scorching deserts where water was scarcer than gold, scaled snow-capped mountains that stole the breath from their lungs, and forded raging rivers that swallowed men whole. But hardship never slowed them. Every mile was a calculated step toward a vision far grander than mere conquest. Alexander didn't just want to rule the world, he wanted to remake it. Consider the city of Alexandria in Egypt, a glittering monument to his ambition. Founded on a strip of land between the sea and a lake, it became a crossroads of cultures where Greek philosophers debated with Egyptian priests and Babylonian astronomers mapped the skies alongside Indian mathematicians. The Great Library of Alexandria wasn't just a collection of scrolls. It was a testament to Alexander's belief that knowledge, like empire, had no borders. He didn't just bring Greek culture to the East, he wove it together with Persian, Egyptian, and Indian traditions, creating a tapestry of ideas that would outlast his reign. Yet for all his brilliance, Alexander's empire was as fragile as it was vast. When he died at 32, fevered and exhausted in Babylon, his generals tore his legacy apart like vultures dividing a carcass. The kingdoms they carved from his conquests, Ptolemaic Egypt, Seleucid Syria, became rivals locked in endless war. It's a paradox that defines his story. The man who dreamed of unity left behind a world fractured by conflict. But look closer and you'll see his true legacy isn't in the battles or the crumbling borders. It's in the quiet revolutions he sparked. Greek art mingled with Buddhist sculpture in Afghanistan, creating the serene faces of Gandhara statues. Zoroastrian fire temples borrowed columns from Greek architecture. Even the idea of a cosmopolitan world, a term born from his empire, echoes today, reminding us that cultures grow richer when they meet. Alexander's march proved something profound, that conquest could be more than taking land. It could be about sharing ideas, however imperfectly, across the divides of geography and tradition. His empire fell, but the connections he forged endured, whispering that the greatest journeys aren't just about distance, they're about transformation. If you've ever walked on a road that felt like it could last forever, you might have been stepping on Roman engineering. Picture a highway stretching from the misty highlands of Scotland to the sun-baked sands of Egypt, every mile laid with the same relentless precision. The Romans didn't just build roads, they built a skeleton for their empire, a network so sturdy that some paths still bear the weight of modern traffic 2,000 years later. But these weren't just slabs of stone, they were feats of geometry layered like a cake, gravel at the base for drainage, crushed rock packed firm, and a surface of interlocking stones angled slightly to shed rainwater. Cambered, graded, and ditched on either side, these roads defied time because they were designed to outlast the people who built them. What's astonishing isn't just the engineering, it's the ambition. At its peak, Rome's road system spanned over 250,000 miles, enough to circle the Earth 10 times. A merchant in Londinium could load his wagon with British tin and know the ruts would guide him all the way to Rome, where his goods might end up as part of a senator's wine jug. Soldiers could march 25 miles a day on these roads, their sandals slapping against the same stones that carried messages from emperors, stamped with wax seals that outran horseback riders. The roads even had their own rest stops, mansions where officials swapped tired horses for fresh ones, proving that Rome understood speed before the invention of the engine. But the real power of these roads wasn't in the stones, it was in the connections they forged. Latin, once a local dialect, became the lingua franca from Spain to Syria because it traveled on carts and sandals. Roman law seeped into distant provinces, blending with local customs to create legal systems that still underpin Europe today. Even religions spread faster along these highways. Early Christians used them to carry their teachings, and the Apostle Paul's missionary journeys were possible because Rome had already paved the way. And then there's the unexpected legacy, the roads that refused to die. Medieval pilgrims followed the Via Francigena to Rome, their footsteps tracing the same path Roman legions once did. Modern highways in France and Spain often shadow ancient routes, their asphalt hiding the ghosts of milestone markers that once counted down the distance to the next city. In York, England, tourists walk on a street that's been continuously used since Roman engineers first laid it, a literal thread tying the present to the past. Rome's genius wasn't just in conquering the world, but in stitching it together. Their roads remind us that the greatest empires aren't built on battles alone, but on the ability to move goods, ideas, people with an efficiency that outlives empires. Every time you take a shortcut down a straight country lane or follow a highway that seems older than the towns around it, you might be walking in the footsteps of an empire that knew how to make the world feel smaller, one stone at a time. When we think of Vikings, images of axe-wielding warriors storming coastal villages often come to mind, but that's only half the story. These Norse explorers were as much merchants as marauders, their sleek longships cutting through waves and rivers alike, connecting worlds from the icy fjords of Norway to the bustling markets of Constantinople. What made their vessels so revolutionary? Imagine a ship so light it could be carried over land when rivers ran shallow, yet sturdy enough to withstand the North Atlantic's fury. With shallow drafts and symmetrical bows and sterns, these ships could reverse direction without turning, a vital trick for navigating narrow waterways or making quick escapes. Take Leif Erikson's legendary journey to Vinland around the year 1000. While medieval Europe still believed the ocean was a void at the edge of the world, Erikson followed whispers of land west of Greenland, tales told by an earlier sailor who'd been blown off course. Sailing into the unknown, he reached what's now Newfoundland, where archaeologists at Eland's Orcs Meadows found Viking artifacts, iron nails, a cloak pin, and remnants of butternuts that proved trade with indigenous peoples. This wasn't just a fleeting visit. The sagas speak of attempts to settle, though conflicts with the local Skraelings, likely the Beothuk or Micmac peoples, drove them away. Yet their brief presence rewrote history, proving the Atlantic was crossable centuries before Columbus, but the Vikings' reach extended far beyond North America. Picture a trade network stretching like a spiderweb across Europe, furs from Russia, silver from the Islamic world, and glass beads from the Rhine, all funneled through towns like Birka in Sweden or Hedeby in Denmark. Their routes weren't random. They read nature's signs. Migrating birds hinted at nearby land, while the color and temperature of water revealed currents. A sunstone, possibly calcite or cordierite, may have helped them locate the sun on overcast days, a primitive but effective form of polar navigation. Their settlements tell another story of adaptability. In Iceland, they thrived on fishing and sheep herding, while Greenland's Norse colonies clung to survival for 400 years despite creeping glaciers. Recent studies of their bones show they ate seal meat when crops failed, blending traditional farming with Inuit survival tactics. Even their mythology reflected their journeys. The 9 worlds of Yggdrasil mirrored the real lands they explored, from fiery Muspelheim to icy Niflheim. What's striking is how the Vikings balanced brutality with business. In York, England, they turned a military camp into a thriving trade hub where Arabic coins jingled in Saxon purses. In Kiev, Norse traders became the ruling class, forging what would become Russia. Their legacy isn't just in the lands they raided, but in the connections they wove between Scandinavia and the Silk Road, between myth and geography, between the known world and the terra incognita they dared to chase. They remind us that exploration isn't just about discovery. It's about the messy, often violent collisions and collaborations that reshape the map and the human story. Marco Polo's journey began as a simple trade expedition and became one of history's most transformative adventures. At just 17, he left Venice with his father and uncle, following the Silk Road's labyrinthine routes through deserts and mountain passes where bandits lurked and languages changed with every oasis. But nothing could have prepared him for what he'd find in the court of Kublai Khan. The Mongol ruler's capital, Xanadu, wasn't just a city, it was a spectacle of power. Palaces lined with gold leaf, gardens where exotic animals roamed, and a postal system so efficient it put Europe's crumbling Roman roads to shame. Polo's descriptions of these wonders read like fantasy to his contemporaries, coal burning hotter than wood, paper currency replacing clunky coins, and rivers crowded with merchant ships carrying silks finer than anything woven in Florence. Yet what made Polo's account revolutionary wasn't just the wealth he witnessed, it was the sophistication. In Hangzhou, a city larger than any in Europe, he marveled at streetlights illuminating night markets, a concept unimaginable in dimly lit medieval towns. He documented gunpowder's thunderous power, a technology Europeans wouldn't master for centuries, and described the Khan's administrative genius, where census takers tracked every household and granary. These weren't just exotic curiosities, they were glimpses of a civilization that had refined governance, commerce, and daily life to a degree that challenged Europe's self-image as the pinnacle of progress. Skeptics back home dismissed Polo as a fabulist, dubbing his book The Travels Il Milione, a mocking reference to the million-tall tales it contained. How could a place like Cathay exist where people bathed daily and burned black rocks for heat, but Polo's stories held kernels of truth that altered history? When Columbus set sail in 1492, He carried a dog-eared copy of Polo's work, scribbling notes in the margins about the golden roofs of Japan. The very myths that made Polo seem unreliable became fuel for an era of exploration, proving that even exaggerated accounts could reshape the world's imagination. Beyond the material wonders, Polo's greatest legacy might be the cultural bridge he built. He didn't just observe, he served. For 17 years, he acted as the Khan's envoy, traveling to distant provinces and absorbing languages, customs, and technologies. His descriptions of Tibetan musk, Sumatran rhino horns, and Burmese gemstones weren't just inventory lists. They were the first detailed portraits of Asia's diversity for European readers. And though he returned to Venice in 1295, his stories outlived him, whispering a radical idea that the East wasn't a land of monsters or mythical Christian kingdoms, but a mosaic of advanced societies waiting to be understood. The irony, Polo himself might never have grasped the impact of his journey. Captured during a war between Venice and Genoa, he dictated his tales to a fellow prisoner, Rustichello, who flavored them with romantic embellishments. Yet the core truth endured, buried beneath the legend. The world was far larger, stranger, and more interconnected than anyone had dared to dream. His travels remind us that real discovery isn't just about crossing distances, it's about returning with stories that change how we see our place in the tapestry of civilizations. Imagine setting out on a journey so vast it would take nearly 3 decades, covering distances equivalent to circling the Earth 3 times, on foot, by camel, and aboard rickety ships. That's exactly what Ibn Battuta did in the 14th century, leaving his home in Tangier at 21 with a single goal: to perform the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca. But what began as a religious obligation spiraled into an epic odyssey spanning 75,000 miles across 44 modern-day countries. His path wove through the scorching Sahara, where tribes guided by the stars could pinpoint oases invisible to outsiders, to the spice-scented ports of India, where monsoon winds dictated the fate of kingdoms. And unlike Marco Polo, who traveled as a merchant, Battuta moved through the world as a scholar, a judge, and sometimes even an adventurer fleeing assassination attempts, his sharp observations preserving a mosaic of medieval life that historians still treasure today. Take his account of the Mali Empire, where gold was so abundant it seemed to grow like crops. He described Mansa Musa's legendary wealth with awe, noting how the emperor's generosity during his own Hajj had destabilized Egypt's economy by flooding it with gold. But Battuta also captured quieter moments: the intricate face tattoos of Berber women, the eerie silence of desert nights broken only by camel bells, and the shock of seeing female rulers in the Maldives wielding real political power, something unthinkable in his native Morocco. His writings reveal a world where cultural norms shifted dramatically with every border crossed. In Constantinople, he gaped at the Hagia Sophia's dome, a marvel of Christian architecture, while in Delhi, he served as a qadi, dispensing Islamic justice in a court where elephants carried prisoners to trial. What's striking isn't just the distance he covered, but how he navigated the complexities of each society. Stranded in the Maldives after a shipwreck, he ingratiated himself by marrying into local nobility, only to flee later, appalled by their relaxed customs. In China, he recoiled at the unfamiliarity of chopsticks but marveled at paper money and the efficiency of the Grand Canal. His biases as a medieval Muslim scholar peek through. He often criticized practices outside his faith, yet his curiosity usually won out. When he met a pious hermit in Syria or debated Sufi mystics in Persia, he recorded their wisdom with the same reverence he'd give a legal text. Battuta's travels remind us that the greatest journeys aren't measured in miles, but in the willingness to let the world change you. By the time he returned to Morocco, dictated his memoir to a scribe, and faded into obscurity, he'd done more than just observe. He'd threaded together a planetary tapestry of human experience. His legacy whispers a truth we often forget, that borders are fluid and understanding is the ultimate destination. Zheng He's fleet would have dwarfed Columbus's ships not just in size but in ambition. Picture a floating city of over 300 vessels, their crimson sails catching the wind as they sliced through the Indian Ocean. The largest, called treasure ships, stretched 400 feet from bow to stern, longer than a football field, with 9 masts and decks stacked like pagodas. These weren't just boats, they were diplomatic tools carrying silk, porcelain, and over 28,000 crewmen, from sailors to astrologers. While Europe's explorers hugged coastlines, Zheng He's armada rode monsoon winds to Africa, returning with giraffes for the emperor's zoo and envoys from as far as Mecca. One voyage in 1415 epitomized their scale. Sailing past Sumatra, the fleet encountered pirates threatening trade routes. Zheng He didn't just defeat them, he outsmarted them. After luring their leader aboard under truce, he captured him and scattered the leaderless fleet, securing safe passage for merchants from Java to Ceylon. In Calicut, India, he negotiated trade agreements with a copper tablet inscribed in 3 languages, Chinese, Tamil, and Persian. And in Mogadishu, his men traded for ambergris and frankincense, while artists sketched the unfamiliar skyline. This wasn't exploration, it was a mobile empire projecting Ming China's power without firing a shot. Yet the most fascinating detail lies in what the fleet carried. Compasses, yes, but also watertight bulkhead compartments, a technology Europe wouldn't adopt for centuries. Their navigational charts, stitched together like quilts, marked currents and star positions with eerie precision. And then there were the interpreters. The crew included speakers of Arabic, Swahili, and even Sanskrit, turning each landing into a cross-cultural exchange. In Malacca, Zheng He established a warehouse so vast it became the cornerstone of a bustling trade hub, where Chinese lacquer met Sumatran pepper. The fleet's sudden disappearance from history is as staggering as its achievements. After Zheng He's death in 1433, the new emperor banned ocean voyages, burned the fleet's records, and let the ships rot in harbor. Some say it was the cost, others cite Confucian scholars who saw foreign trade as corrupting. But the consequences were profound. Had China maintained its naval dominance, the Indian Ocean might have become a Chinese sphere of influence, with outposts in Zanzibar and Lisbon. Instead, the void left by their retreat paved the way for Portuguese caravels and Dutch merchantmen. Zheng He's story isn't just about what was lost, it's about how quickly the tides of history can turn. His voyages proved that 15th century China had the means to dominate the seas, but not the will. In the end, the treasure fleet became a ghost of what might have been, a reminder that curiosity and caution are locked in an eternal dance, shaping empires as surely as any storm or star. Hidden beneath Jordan's rose-red cliffs, Petra wasn't just a city, it was a masterpiece of deception. From the outside, the narrow Sikh gorge appeared to lead nowhere, a winding slit in the rock barely wide enough for 3 camels to walk abreast. But for Nabatean traders, this was the ultimate sales tactic. Imagine rounding the final bend and suddenly facing the towering facade of Al-Khosneh, the treasury, its columns glowing like molten copper in the desert sun. The effect was calculated awe, a psychological flex meant to impress and intimidate wealthy caravan leaders arriving with goods from Arabia, India, and beyond. The Nabateans didn't just build Petra, they engineered it. In a land where rain fell maybe twice a year, they carved channels and cisterns into the cliffs, funneling every precious drop to reservoirs that could sustain 30,000 people. Their pipes had built-in filters to keep out sand, and their staircases doubled as water conduits during flash floods. But Petra's real genius lay in its location. Perched at the crossroads of the incense route and the Silk Road's southern spur, it became a toll booth for the ancient world's luxury trade. Frankincense from Oman, myrrh from Yemen, Chinese silk, and Indian spices all passed through its gates. The Nabateans taxed every load, growing rich not by moving goods themselves, but by controlling the bottleneck where east met west. Yet Petra's decline wasn't sudden, it was a slow suffocation. When the Romans annexed Nabatea in 106, they redirected trade to their shiny new roads and ports. Then came the final blow, maritime routes. By the 4th century, ships could sail from Egypt to India in months, bypassing desert caravans altogether. The aqueducts dried up, the workshops fell silent. Sand swallowed entire neighborhoods, leaving Bedouin tribes as the only ones who remembered the city's name. Then, in 1812, a Swiss explorer named Johann Burckhardt disguised himself as an Arab scholar and convinced a local guide to lead him to the lost city. His journal describes scrambling through the sick, heart-pounding, only to freeze at the sight of the treasury, its carved faces worn but still proud, like a king sleeping in plain sight. Archaeologists later found something even more surprising. Petra wasn't just a trading post. Scrolls revealed it was a cultural blender, where Greek architects worked alongside Nabatean stonecutters, and Roman gods shared temple space with Arabian deities. Today, Petra's silent stones whisper a lesson about hubris and adaptation. The Nabateans mastered their environment, but couldn't control the tides of change. Their city reminds us that no empire, no matter how clever, is immune to the shifting currents of commerce and time. Walking its ruins, you can almost hear the echoes of bargaining merchants and clinking caravan bells, ghosts of a world that once believed it would last forever. Across the blistering expanse of the Sahara, where temperatures could melt lead and sandstorms erased entire trails, survival seemed impossible. Yet for centuries, caravans of up to 12,000 camels moved like slow rivers through the dunes. Each beast carried 400 pounds of salt, packed in slabs so pure they were carved like marble from mines deep in the Sahara. But this wasn't just any trade route, it was an economic lifeline that turned sand into gold. Literally, in exchange for these salt cakes, West African empires like Ghana and Mali traded nuggets of gold so abundant that Arab scholars wrote of kings who tethered their horses to boulders of the precious metal. The journey wasn't for the faint-hearted. A single round trip from Sijil Mossa in Morocco to Timbuktu could take 3 months, with caravans stretching over a mile long. Guides relied on the stars and the shape of dunes to navigate, while the bones of lost travelers served as grim mile markers. Thirst killed as swiftly as bandits' water was rationed to a cup per person per day, and camels, able to lose a third of their body weight in water, became living canteens. Their milk sustained traders when oasis wells ran dry, yet the rewards justified the risk. In medieval Cairo, West African gold minted into dinars financed empires, while in the Sahel, salt was worth its weight in gold. Without it, survival was impossible. Salt preserved food, replenished electrolytes, and became a currency itself, cut into bars small enough to buy a loaf of bread or stacked to ransom kings. Timbuktu, the desert's crown jewel, thrived as the nexus of this exchange. Its libraries held manuscripts on astronomy, medicine, and law, scribed in gold ink on indigo-dyed parchment. Scholars from as far as Baghdad debated in its universities, while poets composed verses in its bustling squares. The city's wealth wasn't just material, it was intellectual, fueled by the flow of ideas that rode alongside sacks of salt and gold. When Mansa Musa, the richest man in history, passed through Cairo on his Hajj in 1324. His caravan's sheer extravagance, including 80 camels carrying gold dust, collapsed local economies for a decade. His generosity wasn't just piety, it was advertising, announcing Mali's dominance over the Sahara's golden highways. The caravan's legacy lingers in unexpected places. Modern Mauritanian traders still use centuries-old family route maps memorized through song. The word salary derives from the Latin salarium, a soldier's payment in salt. And in Timbuktu's archives, fragile manuscripts still whisper of a time when the desert wasn't a barrier, but a bridge where the meeting of sand and savanna birthed some of history's most dazzling civilizations. The Sahara's lesson is clear: scarcity breeds innovation, and even the most unforgiving landscapes can't extinguish humanity's drive to connect, trade, and thrive. Pepper, cinnamon, and cloves today, they're pantry staples, but 1,000 years ago, they were treasures worth more than gold. Imagine a single sack of peppercorns buying a Venetian merchant a mansion, or a handful of nutmeg seeds serving as a nobleman's ransom. These tiny, fragrant commodities didn't just flavor food. They fueled empires, bankrolled wars, and drew maps of the world we still recognize today. The spice trade was history's first true global economy, stitching together continents long before the term globalization existed. At the heart of it all lay the Moluccas, a chain of Indonesian islands so lush with clove and nutmeg trees that sailors could smell their perfume miles out to sea. Arab traders kept their locations secret for centuries, spinning tales of mythical beasts guarding the shores. By the time these spices reached Europe via Middle Eastern caravan routes, their value had multiplied 1,000-fold. A single pound of mace, the crimson lace surrounding a nutmeg seed, could cost a medieval laborer 3 months' wages. No wonder European powers became desperate to cut out the middlemen. Enter Vasco da Gama, the Portuguese explorer who, in 1498, became the first European to sail around Africa's Cape of Good Hope and reach India. His voyage wasn't just about discovery, it was a corporate raid. When his ships returned to Lisbon with holds full of pepper, the profits covered the entire cost of the expedition 60 times over. Suddenly, every kingdom with a coastline wanted in on the action. The Dutch, the Spanish, and the English turned the Indian Ocean into a battleground, with nutmeg-rich islands like run changing hands so often that treaties read like real estate auctions. But the spice trade's most unexpected twist, it literally redrew the globe. When Columbus set sail in 1492, he wasn't looking for America, he was searching for a shortcut to the Spice Islands. His miscalculation gave Spain a new continent, while Magellan's later expedition proved the Earth was circumnavigable by following the scent of cloves. These quests weren't just risky, they were existential. Crews on spice voyages faced scurvy, mutiny, and storms that swallowed ships whole. The Dutch East India Company, history's first multinational corporation, even executed employees for smuggling nutmeg seeds, a crime punishable by death. Yet beyond the bloodshed, spices quietly reshaped daily life. In London, coffee houses serving spiced chocolate became hubs of Enlightenment debate. In Istanbul, saffron-infused rice graced sultans' tables, while in India, chili peppers from the New World revolutionized curries. The very idea of exotic cuisine was born on these trade winds. Even modern medicine owes a debt. Cloves numbed toothaches long before Novocaine, and turmeric's antiseptic properties were noted in ancient Ayurvedic texts. The irony, today we sprinkle cinnamon on oatmeal without a second thought. But those unassuming jars in your kitchen cupboard are the legacy of empires risen and fallen, of sailors who braved the unknown for a taste of something rare. The spice routes remind us that hunger for flavor, for wealth, for discovery, has always been the most powerful compass of all. Beneath the dense forests and misty shores of northern Europe, a different kind of gold flowed, not mined from the earth, but washed up by the sea. Amber, that golden-hued fossilized resin, glowed like captured sunlight in the hands of Norse traders and Roman aristocrats alike. But this wasn't just a pretty trinket. For centuries, it fueled a sprawling trade network known as the Amber Road, a hidden cousin to the Silk Road that connected the icy Baltic to the sun-drenched Mediterranean. Picture a chain of merchants, each link passing amber southward, from Viking gatherers who waded into frigid waters to collect it, to Germanic middlemen who transported it along river routes, all the way to Roman craftsmen who carved it into beads, amulets, and even cups so clear they were said to reveal poison. The journey of a single piece of amber could span continents and generations. A lump pried from the shores of Prussia might travel down the Vistula River, through Celtic trading posts in modern-day Poland, across the Alps via Brenner Pass, and finally arrive in Aquileia, Rome's bustling gateway to the north. There, artisans transformed it into luxury goods, some so prized they ended up in the tombs of Egyptian pharaohs. Amber's preservative qualities, making it a symbol of eternity. The demand was insatiable. Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder wrote that a small amber figurine could cost more than a healthy slave, fueling an economy where Baltic tribes paid their taxes not in coins but in raw resin. Archaeology reveals just how far this network reached. Baltic amber turned up in King Tutankhamun's tomb, strung alongside lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. A single hoard found in Lithuania contained over 400 amber pieces, hidden during a raid 2,000 years ago. Even more telling are the Roman glass beads and bronze brooches unearthed in Scandinavia, proof that trade flowed both ways. The Amber Road wasn't a single path but a web, with branches stretching to Byzantium and beyond. Yet the road's true legacy lies in the connections it forged between wildly different cultures. Norse sagas speak of Freya's tears, amber droplets said to be the goddess's grief turned to stone. Romans, meanwhile, believed it held healing powers, grinding it into powders to cure ailments from sore throats to madness. These myths weren't just folklore, they were marketing, adding mystical value to a substance that might otherwise seem like simple tree resin. Today, fragments of the Amber Road still surface, sometimes literally. A farmer plowing a field in Hungary might strike a Viking-era amber pendant, or a diver in the Adriatic could find a cargo of raw resin lost in a shipwreck centuries ago. Each discovery stitches another thread into the vast tapestry of ancient trade, reminding us that beauty, as much as necessity, has always driven humanity to cross borders, brave dangers, and weave the world together one golden piece at a time. Higher than the Alps, steeper than the Rockies, the Andes Mountains seem to defy human passage until the Inca turned them into a highway. Without wheels, without beasts of burden, they engineered a road network so precise that runners could relay a message from Quito to Cusco, a distance of 1,200 miles in just 5 days. That's faster than a horse could gallop the same route. Their secret, a system of purpose-built trails, suspension bridges woven from mountain grass, and way stations stocked with food and fresh couriers every 6 miles. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was a logistical marvel that held an empire together. The roads weren't paved in gold, but in something far more valuable: practicality. In the highlands, workers cut staircases into cliffsides, angling them to prevent erosion. Along deserts, they built walls to shield travelers from sandstorms. Jungle sections featured elevated paths to avoid flooding, while mountain passes included drainage channels to handle melting snow. The Inca understood their terrain intimately. They built not over the land, but with it. And these roads weren't just for messengers. Llama caravans hauled fish from the coast to the highlands, while potatoes and quinoa made the reverse journey. Soldiers marched these routes to quell rebellions, and pilgrims followed them to sacred sites like Machu Picchu, where the sunrise aligned with temple windows during solstices. Spanish conquistadors, accustomed to cobbled European streets, were stunned by the system's sophistication. Chronicler Pedro de Cieza de Leon wrote that some bridges were so high, looking down would make a man's head spin. Yet within decades, the colonizers dismantled much of the network, repurposing stones for churches and letting trails crumble. They missed the point entirely. The roads weren't just physical pathways, they were threads of communication woven into the landscape. Runners or chasquis memorized quipus, knotted cords that recorded everything from tax rolls to epic poems, turning each relay into a living database. Today, fragments of this genius endure. The Inca trail to Machu Picchu is just a shadow of the original, yet even this section reveals their mastery. Hikers pass through microclimates where the stones subtly change texture, rougher on steep ascents for grip, smoother on flats for speed. Nearby, at Cueswachoca, villagers still rebuild a suspension bridge the old way, twisting iku grass into cables strong enough to hold a procession. It's a testament to resilience, yes, but also to a deeper truth. The Inca didn't conquer the Andes. They listened to them, learned their rhythms, and built a system so in tune with the land that even conquest couldn't erase it completely. Their roads whisper that the greatest engineering doesn't fight nature, it dances with it. Imagine a merchant in 14th century Lubeck loading barrels of salted herring onto a ship bound for Bergen. The fish, preserved to last months, would feed Norwegian miners, while the return voyage brought iron and copper crucial for European smiths. This wasn't just trade, it was the lifeblood of the Hanseatic League, a network so powerful it functioned like a medieval superpower without borders. Stretching from Russia's fur-rich forests to London's wool markets, this alliance of over 200 cities turned the Baltic and North Seas into a bustling economic corridor, proving that commerce could outmuscle kings. What set the Hanseatic League apart wasn't just scale, it was strategy. Merchants in Rostock or Riga didn't act alone. They pooled resources to build contours, fortified trading posts that operated like early embassies. In Bruges, their warehouse complex had its own jail and courtroom. At the Novgorod contour, strict rules governed everything from debt repayment to bedtime candles out by 9. This wasn't mere bureaucracy, it was a blueprint for trust. German wool traders knew a deal sealed in Tallinn would be honored in Gdansk because the League's legal system backed it. Even piracy backfired against them. When Danish kings targeted their ships, the League simply blockaded Denmark's coasts until the monarchy begged for peace. The League's real genius lay in turning ordinary goods into geopolitical leverage. Take timber. Norwegian pine beams built half of Europe's cathedrals, but Hanseatic merchants controlled the supply chains. When English kings needed ships to fight the 100 Years' War, they relied on League carpenters. Furs from Novgorod lined the robes of French nobles, while Baltic amber adorned rosaries across Christendom. Yet their most surprising export, literacy, League towns mandated schoolhouses, creating a merchant class that could track deals across languages and ledgers. Decline came not from failure, but from a changing world. As nation-states rose, kings resented the League's stateless power. Dutch ships, faster and cheaper, undercut their monopolies. The final blow came in 1669, when the last Hanseatic, their council, met in Lübeck's shadowed halls, attended by just 9 cities. But walk through Hamburg's Speicherstadt today, and you'll see red brick warehouses echoing Hanseatic designs. Modern trade blocs like the EU owe it a quiet debt. the idea that cooperation, not conquest, could make a region rich. The League's legacy whispers that commerce isn't just about goods, it's about the rules, the trust, and the invisible threads that bind economies together. Long before compasses pointed north or satellites orbited overhead, ancient travelers stared at the night sky and saw not just stars, but a celestial roadmap. The Greeks called the North Star Kinosaura, the dog's tail, and built their first world maps around it, sketching coastlines with surprising accuracy given they'd never flown above them. But their maps held more than geography. They wove together myth and measurement, placing the underworld at the edges and marking the Pillars of Hercules as the gateway to the unknown. These weren't just navigational aids, they were cultural fingerprints, revealing how societies understood their place in the cosmos. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Polynesian navigators crafted stick charts from palm ribs and shells, not to carry on voyages but to train their minds. The curves of the sticks represented ocean swells, the shells key islands, a tactile memory system that turned the sea's rhythms into a living map. Masters like Mau Piailug could feel a canoe's drift by how waves bumped against the hull, discern land by the way birds flew at dawn, and track position by the angle of Venus over the horizon. Their knowledge wasn't written in ink but whispered in chants, passed down through generations like a sacred trust. Medieval sailors, though, relied on portolan charts, parchments so detailed that modern researchers have matched their coastlines to satellite images with eerie precision. Drawn on stretched sheepskin, these maps ignored political borders, focusing instead on ports, currents, and the crisscrossing room lines that guided ships from Alexandria to Genoa. A single chart might note where fresh water could be found, which bays hid pirates, or how the tides behaved near a rocky cape. The Mediterranean's entire trade network fit on pages small enough to roll into a captain's chest. What unites these systems is their blend of observation and intuition. The Vikings navigated foggy seas using sunstones, crystals that polarized light to reveal the sun's position even on cloudy days. Arab traders followed the seasonal winds called monsoons like clockwork, their hows arriving in India with uncanny timing. And in China, the invention of the magnetic compass didn't just guide ships, it revolutionized map-making, turning the Earth's magnetism into a tool for empire. These ancient navigators remind us that exploration wasn't just about bravery, it was about attention. They listened to the ocean's whispers, watched the stars' slow dances, and trusted knowledge painstakingly gathered over centuries. Their maps weren't static drawings but living dialogues between humanity and the elements, proof that the world reveals its secrets to those who know how to look. In an age of GPS, their legacy endures. Sometimes the oldest ways of seeing are the most profound. For millions across the medieval world, the most important journey wasn't for gold or spices. It was a sacred promise written in footsteps. Picture the Camino de Santiago, where pilgrims from every corner of Europe converged on northwestern Spain, their cloaks pinned with scallop shells that clattered like rain as they walked. Some came as penance, others seeking miracles, but all shared the road, sleeping in the same stone shelters, drinking from the same iron cups chained to village wells. Along the way, French minstrels taught Moorish love songs to German merchants, while Flemish weavers traded wool for tales of St. James' miracles. The Camino wasn't just a path, it was a living tapestry of faith and folklore, where every mile wove strangers into neighbors. Now imagine the Hajj unfolding across 14 centuries like clockwork. Even during the Crusades, when Christian and Muslim armies clashed, Venetian merchants sold Egyptian pilgrims safe passage contracts, proof that faith could transcend war. Caravans from Damascus to Mecca swelled to 70,000 travelers, their route dotted with wells dug by caliphs and rest stops built by sultans' wives. The Hajj logistical feats rivaled Rome's highways. Postal stations relayed messages ahead to prepare markets, while doctors rode with the caravans to treat heat stroke and sand fever. And when pilgrims returned home, they carried more than blessings. They brought Indonesian spices sold in Mecca's souks, Persian poetry recited at desert camps, and architectural ideas from Cairo's minarets that would inspire mosques as far as Mali. But pilgrimages weren't just grand spectacles. In Japan, peasants saved for years to join the Shikoku pilgrimage, circling 88 temples with white robes and straw sandals. Along the way, villagers offered free lodgings called ostai, not out of charity, but because hosting pilgrims was believed to bring karma as rich as the journey itself. Meanwhile, in Varanasi, Hindu devotees still wade into the Ganges at dawn, their whispered prayers mingling with the clang of temple bells, following rituals unchanged since Buddha walked these same ghats 25 centuries ago. What's extraordinary isn't just the distances covered, but the invisible threads these journeys spun. The Hajj birthed the first travelers' checks, letters of credit honored from Baghdad to Cordoba. The Camino's demand for guidebooks spurred early printing presses in Lyon. Even road cuisine evolved. Pilgrim hostels in Spain served garlic soup to ward off colds, a recipe still eaten today. These routes proved that when humans move toward something greater than themselves, they leave behind more than footprints. They build bridges of shared experience that outlast empires. Whether motivated by devotion, hope, or redemption, pilgrims remind us that the act of journeying itself can be sacred, turning dusty trails into arteries of unity across a fractured world. Rising from the shores of ancient Alexandria like a beacon, the library wasn't just a building, it was a revolution bound in papyrus. Picture scholars from Athens to Babylon trading theorems in its shaded colonnades, while ships in the harbor unloaded not just spices and silks, but scrolls. Every vessel docking in Egypt's busiest port was searched for books, which were confiscated, copied in the library's scriptorium, and returned with duplicates, an ancient open-source project. At its peak, this intellectual treasure chest held over 500,000 scrolls, from Euclid's geometry to Eratosthenes' proof that the Earth was round. The air must have hummed with languages, Greek philosophers debating in the gardens, Egyptian priests translating hieroglyphs into Greek, and Persian astronomers charting the paths of planets. But the library's brilliance lay in how it turned geography into genius. When Alexander founded the city, he placed it at the crossroads of 3 continents, ensuring a constant flow of ideas. Hipparchus, working here, compiled the first star catalogue using Babylonian observations. The physician Herophilus dissected cadavers in its halls, discovering the nervous system knowledge that might have leaped centuries ahead if his works hadn't vanished in the flames. Even the library's failures were visionary. The inventor Hero built steam-powered toys here, not realizing his gadgets hinted at industrialization 2 millennia early. The destruction, that's where history turns murky. Julius Caesar's siege in 48 BC likely started the fire, but the library limped on for centuries. Christian riots in the 4th century targeted pagan texts, and by the time Arab armies arrived in the 7th century, the scrolls may already have been scattered or lost. What's certain is that the disappearance wasn't a single catastrophe, but a slow unraveling, like a tapestry picked apart thread by thread. Yet the library's ghost lingers in unexpected places. When monks in Byzantium or Baghdad copied ancient texts, they were often working from Alexandria's duplicates. A 9th century Arabic translation of a lost Greek medical text might trace back to a scribe who once walked those halls. The very idea of a university, a place where all knowledge coexists, owes its DNA to this Egyptian experiment. And that's the bittersweet lesson. Even in ruin, the library proved ideas are contagions. They slip through sieges, outlive empires, and surface centuries later in the unlikeliest hands. The fire couldn't burn that truth. That curiosity, once set loose, never truly disappears. Imagine setting off across the Sahara with nothing but a goatskin bag sloshing with water and a wooden staff to test the sand's firmness. Ancient travelers didn't have the luxury of lightweight gear or GPS. They relied on tools as ingenious as they were essential. Take the Roman legionnaire's sarcina, a backpack crafted from leather and wood that distributed weight evenly across the shoulders, allowing soldiers to march 30 miles a day with rations, spare sandals, and even a digging tool. This wasn't just a bag, it was a feat of ergonomics designed to endure campaigns stretching from Britain's drizzle to Syria's scorching sun. But survival wasn't just about carrying, it was about remembering. The Incas' quippers, bundles of knotted cords, turned string into spreadsheets. Each knot's position, color, and tightness recorded numbers or even narratives, letting administrators track supplies across an empire of terraced mountains. A runner could carry a quipu lighter than a tablet, yet it held census data, harvest yields, or battle plans. Modern scholars are still deciphering their full complexity, but one thing's clear: this was a language of logistics woven into portable form. And then there were the passports of the ancient world. Chinese diplomats during the Han Dynasty carried wooden or bamboo slips inscribed with their rank, destination, and the emperor's seal, a precursor to modern visas. These weren't mere formalities, they guaranteed safe passage and lodging at government way stations, where officials recorded arrivals like ancient border control. Meanwhile, in Persia, the royal road system issued clay tablets to messengers, ensuring fresh horses at each checkpoint. Lose your tablet and you'd be stranded. It was both credential and lifeline. Navigation tools ranged from the sublime to the simple. Viking sun compasses, wooden discs with notches to track shadows, worked even under cloud cover when paired with sunstones or crystals that polarized light to reveal the sun's hidden position. Polynesian navigators, though, needed no instruments. They memorized wave patterns, star paths, and even the flight of seabirds, turning the ocean itself into a living map. Their canoes carried little more than dried coconuts and woven sails, yet their knowledge let them pinpoint islands invisible over the horizon. And what about those unexpected innovations? The leather boaters, used by Iberian shepherds' wineskins lined with pine resin to prevent leaks, doubled as early canteens for medieval pilgrims. Mongolian archers wore thumb rings of jade or bone to protect their fingers during marathon rides, while Silk Road merchants sewed gemstones into their hats as hidden emergency funds. Even clothing was multi-purpose. The layered robes of desert nomads trapped cool air by day and warmth by night, adapting to extremes without a single stitch changed. These artifacts aren't just relics, they're proof that necessity sparks invention long before technology takes credit. A Roman backpack's design echoes in modern hiking packs, the quipu's knots foreshadow binary code. Every scratched compass and weathered water skin whispers the same truth: the challenges of travel haven't changed, only the tools have. And when we dig through the layers of time, we find that the most ingenious solutions are often the simplest, crafted not for convenience, but for survival by people who dared to move despite the odds. Picture a scene in a bustling Silk Road caravanserai, a Persian merchant gesticulating over bolts of silk, a Tibetan trader counting out turquoise beads, and a Greek sailor haggling over spices, none speaking the same tongue, yet striking deals that spanned continents. How trade languages thrived where borders blurred. Along the Mediterranean, Greek became the common tongue of commerce, thanks to Alexander's empire, while Aramaic, the language of Jesus, served as the Middle East's unofficial dialect for contracts and treaties. Over in East Africa, Swahili absorbed Arabic, Persian, and Bantu words into a musical hybrid that still connects ports from Mogadishu to Zanzibar. These weren't just languages, they were living marketplaces of sound, shaped by necessity and the rhythm of deal-making. But words alone didn't bridge every gap. In the Mongol Empire, where subjects spoke over 30 languages, interpreters were as vital as horses. Marco Polo relied on them to navigate Kublai Khan's court, while Zheng He's treasure ships carried multilingual scribes to draft proclamations in Tamil, Arabic, and Chinese. Sometimes, though, communication boiled down to sheer creativity. Norse traders in Constantinople developed a silent barter system, with the Byzantines laying out furs on one side of a river, retreating, and waiting for the other side to place corresponding stacks of silver before either party approached. No dictionary needed. Body language and artifacts filled the voids. A Phoenician merchant tapping a clay tablet might signal a request for receipts, while a Maya trader holding up jade beads could spark instant recognition from a Teotihuacan buyer. Archaeologists find clues in the unlikeliest places. A Viking burial in Sweden contained a weight scale with Arabic numerals, suggesting transactions transcended spoken words. Even children's games hint at solutions. Inca knotted strings and Mesopotamian token systems likely evolved from early attempts to tally goods without shared vocabulary. What's fascinating is how these systems left lasting marks. The word check comes from the Arabic sak, meaning written agreement, a relic of medieval trade contracts. In Java, market Malay still mixes Chinese, Dutch, and Javanese terms, a linguistic layer cake of centuries-old deals, and gestures. The thumbs up originated as a Roman gladiatorial signal, spread by traders as shorthand for approval from Britain to Babylon. These improvisations reveal a truth deeper than grammar. Where curiosity and commerce meet, humans will always find a way. Whether through pidgin dialects, handshakes, or scribbled numbers, the history of exploration isn't just about crossing physical borders, it's about dismantling invisible ones, proving that the desire to connect outweighs the fear of misunderstanding. The next time you effortlessly order coffee in a foreign country, remember, you're part of an ancient tradition, stretching back to the first traveler who pointed at a waterskin and hoped for the best. Every step beyond the safety of city walls could mean disaster for ancient travelers. Picture a merchant caravan creeping through the Cilician Gates, a narrow mountain pass in modern-day Turkey. Bandits lurked behind every outcrop, ready to ambush, not just for gold, but for the very clothes on a traveler's back. Roman law prescribed crucifixion for highway robbery, yet the threat persisted. Pirates infested the Mediterranean like sharks, with the notorious Illyrians of the Adriatic even demanding tribute from Rome itself until the Republic sent fleets to crush them. And then there were the natural hazards, avalanches in the Himalayas that buried entire trade parties, or sudden sandstorms in the Taklamakan Desert that erased trails and left bones as markers. But the deadliest threat was invisible. A Silk Road rest stop might seem like salvation until a traveler realized the coughing merchant across the fire had the plague. The Antonine Plague of the 2nd century likely followed Roman troops returning from Mesopotamia, killing millions. Medieval pilgrims on the Camino de Santiago carried lice that spread typhus, while stagnant water in monsoon-soaked ports brewed malaria and dysentery. Without germ theory, diseases were blamed on bad air or divine punishment. By the time a Mongol courier felt feverish, he might have already passed the Black Death to a dozen way stations. Yet what's astonishing isn't the dangers, it's how travelers adapted. Viking crews kept ravens aboard ships. If released, the birds flew toward land, guiding sailors to safety. Caravans crossing the Sahara hired Berber scouts who could smell water miles away. Han Dynasty travelers swallowed ginger to ward off seasickness, a remedy still used today. And when facing pirates, Indian Ocean hows often sailed in convoys, their decks armed with pots of burning oil to hurl at attackers, an ancient version of naval warfare. The psychological toll was just as real. Imagine being Marco Polo, stranded for months in Afghanistan's Badlands after bandits stole your supplies, or a Phoenician sailor watching storm waves dwarf your ship. No emergency flares, no rescue helicopters, just the crushing awareness that if you vanished, no one might ever know. That's why travelers left inscriptions on temple walls or tied prayer flags to mountain passes, not just for divine protection, but to whisper, "I was here." Modern backpacks still carry echoes of these risks. The word danger comes from the Latin dominarium, meaning the power of a lord, because in the ancient world, safety wasn't a right, but a privilege bought with coin or cunning. Today's secure airports and GPS-tracked journeys make it easy to forget how recently humanity tamed the chaos of travel. Those who braved the unknown didn't just face the elements, they gambled with fate itself, leaving behind a legacy written not in guidebooks, but in scars and survival. History remembers the great male explorers, but quietly, in the margins of ancient texts and sagas, women were crossing continents too. Take the Chinese Buddhist nun Faxian, who in the 4th century walked from China to India and back, a journey of over 3,000 miles to collect sacred scriptures. At a time when most women were confined by rigid social expectations, she disguised herself as a merchant to traverse bandit-ridden mountain passes and deserts. Her written account, a record of Buddhist kingdoms, became a vital source for scholars, yet few textbooks mention her name alongside Marco Polo or Ibn Battuta. Then there's Gudrid Thorbjorn Oddetyr, the Viking explorer who sailed to North America 5 centuries before Columbus. Icelandic sagas describe her giving birth in a turf-walled hut in Vinland, then later making a pilgrimage to Rome, crossing the Atlantic and Europe in a single lifetime. While men like Leif Erikson get the glory, Gudrid's story reveals women weren't just passengers on these voyages. They helped settle new lands, negotiate with indigenous peoples, and preserve the oral histories that let us piece together these journeys today. But some of the most extraordinary tales come from the shadows of history. The Japanese poet Lady Sarashina wandered 11th century Japan alone, chronicling her pilgrimages to remote temples with lyrical precision. In the Andes, Chasqui runners, often women, relayed messages across the Inca Empire's rope bridges, their endurance rivaling any soldiers. Even in the male-dominated Islamic world, women like the Andalusian scholar al-Hassan bint Abi Jafar traveled to Mecca for Hajj, then stayed to study with renowned teachers in Damascus and Cairo. Why were their exploits erased? Sometimes it was deliberate. Medieval monks rewriting chronicles omitted female travelers, while Victorian archaeologists assumed any grave with weapons or travel gear must belong to a man, until DNA testing proved otherwise. Other times it was the nature of their journeys. Women often traveled as pilgrims, merchants, or refugees, their motives seen as practical rather than heroic. But dig deeper and you'll find the same courage, ingenuity, and hunger for the unknown that defined their male counterparts. The truth is, exploration was never gendered. It was human. From the Mongolian steppes to the Swahili coast, women mapped the world with their footsteps, their pens, and their resilience. Their stories don't just rewrite history, they remind us that curiosity has no boundaries and adventure belongs to anyone daring enough to pursue it. Across blistering sands and storm-tossed seas, it wasn't just human courage that forged path. It was the silent strength of animals that carried civilizations on their backs. Consider the camel, nature's desert marvel, whose hump stores fat, not water, a detail even seasoned travelers often misunderstand. These creatures could go days without drinking, their wide feet spreading like snowshoes to prevent sinking into dunes, while their nostrils snapped shut against sandstorms. A single caravan might stretch for miles, each camel bearing 500 pounds of salt, silk, or spices, their groans blending with the creak of saddlebags under a white-hot sky. Without them, the Sahara's golden web of trade routes would have remained an impassable void. Horses, though, ruled the open grasslands. The Mongol Empire's lightning conquests weren't just the work of Genghis Khan's tactics. They were built on the stamina of the hardy steppe pony. These animals thrived where others starved, digging through snow to reach winter grass, their short legs offering stability on treacherous terrain. A Mongol rider could switch mounts mid-gallop, covering 100 miles in a day, a feat that turned their armies into something closer to a mobile city. And it wasn't just warfare. On the Silk Road, hybrid breeds like the Fergana horse, coveted by Chinese emperors for their sweating blood, likely a parasitic reaction, became living currency, traded for jade and silk in deals that reshaped economies. But for sheer audacity, nothing matched the beasts of the ocean ships themselves, crafted from timber and rope yet alive with the rhythms of wind and wave. The Polynesian double-hulled canoe, lashed together with coconut fiber, flexed with the sea rather than fought it, while Viking longships rode shallow rivers and open ocean with equal grace, their dragon-head prows slicing through icy waters. Even the humblest fishing dinghy extended human reach, allowing Greek traders to island hop across the Aegean or Micronesian navigators to chase tuna schools far beyond sight of land. These partnerships weren't just practical, they were profound. Camels appear in Nabatean rock art as divine gifts, horses were buried with Scythian warriors as spirit guides, and Phoenician sailors painted eyes on their ships so they could see safe passage. The bond between traveler and animal blurred the line between tool and companion, a reminder that every great journey in history was, at its heart, a collaboration. When we marvel at ancient maps, we're not just seeing human ambition. We're tracing the hoofprints, paw marks, and wake left by creatures who made the impossible routine. Their legacy isn't just in the distances covered, but in the unspoken trust that turned wilderness into highways. The spices in your kitchen cupboard, the words in your language, even the roads beneath your feet, they are all whispers of ancient journeys echoing across millennia. Globalization didn't start with cargo ships and airlines. It began with dusty sandals on forgotten trails and sails billowing over uncharted waters. When you order takeout curry, you're tasting the legacy of Silk Road merchants who carried turmeric from India to Rome. When you say sugar from the Arabic sukkar or orange from the Persian naranj, you're speaking shards of long-lost trade languages. Even national borders often trace the paths of old caravan routes or river crossings, etched into the land by generations of travelers. Consider the humble noodle. Most assume it's purely Italian, until you discover pasta-like dishes in a 2,000-year-old Chinese cookbook, or find evidence that Arab traders may have brought dried noodles to Sicily centuries before Marco Polo's famous and likely exaggerated tale. Food, like languages and customs, is a palimpsest of human movement. The chili pepper, now synonymous with Thai and Mexican cuisine, originated in the Americas, meaning every spicy dish from Sichuan to Budapest is a testament to the Columbian exchange, the most dramatic reshuffling of global flavors since the Silk Road. But the deepest impact isn't just in what we eat or speak, it's in how we see the world. modern backpackers retracing Ibn Battuta's route through Morocco or cyclists pedaling the Inca road system aren't just sightseeing, they're tapping into an ancient rhythm of connection. The thrill of standing where a Phoenician trader once haggled over Tyrian purple dye, or where a Polynesian navigator first spotted a new island, bridges time itself. Even space exploration carries this DNA. NASA engineers studied Inca suspension bridges when designing Mars rover tethers, while astronauts train in extreme environments reminiscent of the Sahara or Himalayas. Perhaps the most poignant legacy is intangible: the quiet courage to step into the unknown. Today's migrants crossing deserts or seas, refugees stitching together new lives, or even digital nomads working from Bali cafes, all share that same spark that drove ancient travelers. The tools have changed, but the essence remains: a stubborn belief that horizons are meant to be chased, that strangers can become neighbors, and that every journey, no matter how small, leaves threads in the tapestry of human history. The next time you bite into a slice of pizza, thank you, Silk Road tomatoes, or zoom across a highway, salute, Roman engineers, remember, you're not just living in the present. You're walking in footsteps that never really faded. The footsteps of ancient travelers echo far beyond the dusty roads and stormy seas they once crossed. They shaped the very fabric of our modern world. Every time we swipe a credit card, we're invoking the trust-based trade systems of the Silk Road. Each time we navigate with GPS, we're standing on the shoulders of Polynesian star readers and Viking sunstone navigators. Even the concept of a global community where ideas leap continents in seconds finds its roots in those early networks of connection, from the Hanseatic League's merchant alliances to Zheng He's floating embassies. These weren't just journeys of survival, they were acts of imagination, proving that borders are human inventions, not laws of nature. What's most striking isn't the distances they covered, but the transformations they sparked. A single sack of peppercorns could topple economies, a forgotten map could inspire empires, and a traveler's notebook, like Ibn Battuta's or Marco Polo's, could rewrite humanity's understanding of itself. The spices in our food, the words in our languages, even the layout of our cities carry fingerprints from these audacious voyages. When you walk down a straight Roman road or marvel at the engineering of an Inca suspension bridge, you're witnessing the stubborn brilliance of people who refused to be limited by geography. Yet their greatest legacy isn't carved in stone or etched on parchment. It's the enduring belief that curiosity is stronger than fear. The Polynesians who sailed into the void, the Nabateans who turned a desert gorge into a metropolis, the Mongols who unified continents under horseback, they all shared a radical faith that the unknown was just the next chapter waiting to be written. Today, as we peer into the depths of space or the mysteries of quantum physics, we're continuing that same tradition. The tools have changed, but the spirit remains, to look beyond the horizon and dare to ask, what if? As we close this chapter, remember history's greatest journeys weren't just about reaching a destination. They were about the connections forged along the way, the ideas exchanged at crossroads, and the stubborn refusal to accept that anything was impossible. So whether you're planning your next adventure or simply curious about the past, keep that spark alive. Hit like if you enjoyed this journey through time, subscribe for more explorations, and drop a comment below. If you could join any of these ancient travelers on their voyages, who would it be? Until next time, keep wandering, wondering, and discovering. The world past, present, and future is vast, vibrant, and waiting.